All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. My name is Alec Harris. I'm honored to serve as president of GIA Publications. So excited that you're here. This webinar is going to be fantastic. We have an amazing panel on finishing strong and looking ahead, using social emotional learning and mindfulness to navigate music teaching during the COVID-19 pandemic. As I said, my name is Alec Harris. I'm president of GIA. I'll be kind of moderating this webinar, but really it's going to be the panelists are going to be doing most of the work. I'm so honored to have with us Scott Edgar, Matthew Arau, and Bobby Olson on the call. So you're going to hear from them in just a second. Just want to talk for you a second about some of the logistics around how this webinar is going to work. First of all, we're recording this webinar. So we will be posting it on the GIA Facebook page and YouTube channel after this is over. So you can share it out. Feel free to refer other folks to it, let folks know about it if they weren't able to attend. So that will be there. And also, as I mentioned earlier, feel free to put into the chat area your name, what you teach, where you're from, so we can see everyone who's on the call. And then there's also another area called Q&A. And that's if you have specific questions for any of the panelists. One of the things that we really wanted to do on this webinar is to make sure we have maximum time for your questions. This is really a critical moment in teaching as we wrap up the school year. And as we've learned this idea of social emotional learning, this this concept of social emotional learning is more relevant now, I think, and mindfulness more relevant now than it's ever been before. And there's all kinds of things that we can do around these areas to be impactful with our students. And so with all of that in mind, I want to also plug a few things. The first thing is I'm going to put into the chat a coupon code, which is SEL in all caps 2020. If you want to use that to get 10% off on Scott's 2 books, Music Education and Social Emotional Learning, and the companion workbook. So I encourage you to use that. It'll be good until the end of this month if you want to get a copy of Scott's book. Also wanted to make sure that I mention that, that Scott and Matthew are both going to be doing workshops at Vandercook, online workshops this summer, where they'll have the opportunity to really dive deeply into these areas. Matthew's is going to be on mindfulness, and Scott's on social emotional learning. So I'm also going to post information about that into the chat as well once we get started. So I'm really excited to introduce this panel, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you a little bit about each of them, and then one more little announcement, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So Dr. Scott Edgar is Associate Professor of Music, Music Education Chair, and Director of Bands at Lake Forest College in Lake Forest, Illinois. Scott is author of Music Education and Social and Emotional Learning, The Heart of Teaching Music, and is an internationally sought-after clinician on the topic. He is a Conn-Selmer educational clinician and VH1 Save the Music Foundation educational consultant. Bobby Olson has taught choir at Round Lake High School in Round Lake, Illinois since 2015. He's previously taught at King's Schools in Seattle, Washington, and Cambridge Lakes Charter School in Pingree Grove, Illinois. He received his BA with an emphasis in music education from Augustana College in Illinois and an MMED from Vandercook College Music. He lives in Third Lake, Illinois with his wife, Dana, their son, Andy, and their very energetic dog, Finny. Dr. Matthew Arau is founder of Upbeat Global, and he's an assistant professor of music, music education chair, and associate director of bands at the Lawrence University Conservatory of Music in Appleton, Wisconsin. He also serves on the faculty of the American Band College and Vandercook College of Music, and is an active Conn-Selmer education clinician. Matthew has been invited to conduct, teach, and speak in over 25 states and 4 continents on the topics of mindfulness, leadership, growth mindset, and creating a positive culture. Matthew taught middle school and high school band for 15 years in Loveland, Colorado, prior to teaching at Lawrence University. One other plug I wanted to mention is that Scott's going to be part of a panel for a follow-up webinar on June 4th, 4 p.m. Eastern Time with NAFME on advocacy. in music and advocating for music programs. So with all of that, I'll turn it over to Scott and take it from there.
Thank you, Alec, and thank you, GIA, for hosting this. You know, folks, I'm just going to be honest with you. In the next 2 weeks, you're going to hear the term SEL and social and emotional learning more than you ever have in your entire life. And, you know, we might say it's a buzzword. We might say this is where we need to live now because we're in a pandemic. But folks, the truth is social and emotional learning was around long before the pandemic, is under such a microscope right now, and is going to be around long after the pandemic. SEL is going to be front and center as we navigate the remainder of the pandemic and get us back into the new reality of what teaching music is going to look like in the fall. Advocacy or not, whether we're using SEL as an advocacy tool or not, our students are in trauma. We are in trauma. We are all in trauma, which means that we all need to beef up our skills to tackle what we're dealing with. Now, I heard it put so beautifully, I didn't come up with this, but that we are all in the same ocean, but we're in different boats, meaning the quality of my boat is impacting how I navigate the waves in the ocean. So whether it be resources, whether it be privilege, whether it be what that looks like is going to impact our ability. But folks, we're all in the same ocean. We are all experiencing a common human trauma right now. So you say, Scott, how do we deal with this with our students? The answer is, coming up, we need to come up with ways to teach our students in ways that we're not necessarily comfortable with. We need to delve into our own heads and figure out our own self-awareness so that we can figure out how to wrap our heads around music education when performance isn't always possible. Because it's going to be, I'm just going to be blunt with you right now, folks, it's going to be a long time until we have concerts the way we're used to. So we need to figure out ways. And the way to do that is through social and emotional learning. We are going to be able to meet our students' needs. Our number one job right now, and I know this is tough because our heads are in musical excellence. It's not to achieve musical excellence. It's to make our students fall in love with music again. It's to meet our students' social and emotional needs through the music classroom. And you say, Scott, that sounds like lowering the bar. Folks, the bar is changing. There is no bar. So the truth is we need to hold ourselves to very high standards as music teachers. If we don't, we're going to be in trouble. But the answer is the bar that we're used to doesn't exist anymore. So we need to morph that bar. And what's going to help that bar feel more comfortable and to still hold ourselves to high standards is to prioritize the kid first. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to pass things over to Matthew, who's going to talk to you a little bit, and then Bobby, and then we'll shoot it off for some questions.
All right, thanks, Scott, and thanks, Alec Harris, for the invitation, and thank you to all of you from around the world for spending some time with us this hour on two very, very important topics. And SEL and mindfulness are a perfect blend that come together. You don't have one without the other. And I've been using mindfulness in my rehearsals with my students at Lawrence University and with the honor bands that I work with, involving mindful breathing in rehearsal. And it's an incredible thing that you can do right now, even on Zoom. I use it with my Zoom classes that I teach at Lawrence and with the leadership online clinics that I've been doing. And it's even more essential and important now to focus on our breathing and slow everything down and recognize that we can be in the present. It's a choice of focus. And most students are anxious about the future, or they're anxious about the past, but they don't have the skills to be present in the moment. And so we can use mindful strategies and skills that we can use ourselves to calm ourselves down, to move from that anxious place to a more calm place that'll ignite our prefrontal cortex and neocortex, where we can actually be the most creative, solution finding and team building people. We can actually be at our best version of ourselves when we are able to be present. And that's really what mindfulness is about. It's about heightening awareness. It's about focusing on the present, being aware of your surroundings in a heightened state, and recognizing that we have much more choice about how we feel than we realize. And when we slow down our breathing, it's the first pathway to shift our emotions. Secondly, we can teach our students that we can focus on what we're grateful for and what we appreciate in life. And then we'll find more things that we're grateful for. And this can begin from the very first step in the morning, the first breath in the morning that we wake up, to an opportunity clock rather than an alarm clock, and set your trajectory for the day. And I always share with teachers that you begin by developing a mindful practice and then share it with your students. And just remember that mindfulness is a practice. You never achieve mastery. And it's something that you can do daily and share with your students. Our students are experiencing incredible anxiety right now. As I've been working with students around the country, one of the most prevalent emotions they're feeling right now is anxiety. And they are craving for solutions. Right before this, I just got off a Zoom call with one of my conducting students, and we just talked about how over the 2 months, he's actually gotten more and more anxious. He started off with tons of energy, was going to achieve all these things. He had all these great plans, but the longer the quarantine has lasted, he's just stressed out of his mind. And he said, Dr. Rao, please help me with strategies. So our students want this. I think it's going to help us as teachers to learn about mindfulness and to begin to embark on our own mindful practices. So now I'm going to pass it on to Bobby Olson.
Thank you, Matthew. I couldn't agree more with being mindful about where we're coming from too. The biggest things I'm seeing are that we miss our students and we miss what we're good at and what we love about teaching. All of that has changed. I miss those daily interactions and I miss those chances to check in. And what I've realized is that's been sending me through these waves of grief almost and I want it to be linear and I want it to be done and that I've dealt with it. But it keeps on coming up because I keep on thinking about missing students and I continue to have to look at the parts of my job that aren't my favorite, without getting that interaction with kids that I love. So for me personally, I try and start with okay, what am I thinking about? Where am I? And just finding patience with both myself and with my students. I'm trying to look at this as like being a first-year teacher again, where you've got a growth mindset of, hey, we might screw up a Zoom meeting, or my dog might be barking at a parade going through our neighborhood right now. But we're getting better each time. And also finding patience with our students. Some of my best students dropped right off the map when we started remote learning, and that was really frustrating to me. And finally, I got a hold of them, and maybe they are the only person in their family that's working, or they are childcare for their younger siblings. And all of these things that they are dealing with are more important than the assignment I gave, in their mind. And so finding patience with kids, I think, is important, and patience with ourselves, because their needs are way up and our ability to check in on them is down. And so, growth mindset and patience.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, we have 3 questions that have come in so far, and again, encourage all of you to post any additional questions into the chat. First one is from Anna Bose. She says, how can we support students' social emotional status and make relationships with them when starting a new position in the fall, potentially online or during the pandemic conditions? So how can we support students' social emotional status and make relationships with them?
I'm going to jump in and tackle this first. And then, so what this will look like is, Alec or one of us will jump in, and then we'll have an opportunity for Bobby and Matthew or I to kind of jump in and support if anyone else has additional thoughts. But my first thought, new position especially, is I just love the question because you're prioritizing the relationship. That tells me that your mind's in the right mindset to move forward, to start to achieve that relationship. Like Bobby was saying just a second ago, that's what needs to happen so that you're prioritizing the kid over the music at this point. The 2 biggest things that we need to do, which is a change in our mind shift as a music teacher, is to get us thinking, 1, in terms of honoring the student's voice. It's amazing what it does when you just ask a student, how are you doing? Or what do you want out of your music education experience? Or what is the most impactful thing that has happened in your life in the last week? the simple act of one, asking them to reflect, and two, knowing that you just honor their voice is a huge first step in building relationship. And the second thing is give them choice. Give them choice. So we are very, very good in music education at pretty much a top down. It's a one-way arrow from teacher to student often. And we need to develop two-way arrows, whether that be student to student, whether that be teacher to student and student back to teacher. If we can start to think about voice and choice, they are already going to buy in and see your humanity, that you respect their humanity. For anyone who joined the Music for All webinar yesterday, a group of composers, and this isn't band-centric, this isn't orchestra-centric. What we're talking about today is kid-centric. So let's not pigeonhole it in any one area, or choir-centric for Bobby. We're talking about kids, we're talking about teachers, we're talking about humans. What I loved when the composers started talking was they said, you know what, maybe the product's not going to be great, but maybe we can give up just a little bit of control. And maybe we can allow the students to guide their own learning and engage them in the educational process. So you say, you know, how do we build relationships? My flippant answer is the same way we always have, by showing them that we care, by being there for them when they need us, and by rallying around music. And is it going to be as strong as it would be in person? Absolutely not. Is it going to be as strong as it would be as if you've had them for 4 years, which is one of the great blessings that we have in music education? We see our kids for multiple years? No. But that's what we have to work with right now, and that's the best first step I can give you. Matthew or Bobby?
Yeah. I just saw a follow-up question on types of activities to build relationship. And what we found so far is the activities with the highest level of student engagement is where they get a chance to share about themselves, not necessarily music. We had one where kids build a playlist of their favorite music and share that with us. We've asked kids to take personality quizzes and love languages quizzes, and we're finding out way more about our kids than we used to. And that really allows us to ask the kids follow-up questions, or say, wow, I love this personal value, or hey, quality time must be really hard if it's not your family in this situation. And so you start to build a relationship by getting to know non-musical aspects about the kids too.
Great. I'll just add one more thing to that. And one of the ways we connect as human beings is through vulnerability. And so being our authentic self, you know, having your pet jump up on your lap, having your students, you know, see your family in the background, those are actually things that are really positive in this era of building connections. They see us as real people. And I've had students even at the college level that have really found joy in that, where they get to see the bedroom of the professor. It's like, you know, the armor's off and we are all human beings, and seeing that connection. I've also used polls where I ask students how they're feeling and give a range of emotions. Since it's anonymous, it's kind of a nice thing to validate their emotions. And so I agree, anytime students can engage, if you get to use Zoom, I know that not everybody gets to use this technology, and I understand the limitations to access, but things like breakout rooms, students love that. They feel very social in those situations, and it just heightens the connection to the class and ultimately to the teacher. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Great, thank you.
Alec, can I jump in just 1 second before we go to the next question? Because I know we're balancing the Q&A and the chat box, but I saw one thing in the chat box that I just feel needs to be addressed right now, because there's a concern about child safety and abuse and not using avatars and having the videos on. There's a lot in there, and I'm not going to take this in the direction of being a counselor or therapist, but what I am going to say is, if your district does not have a mandated reporting system in place for remote, so if you fear for a child's safety, that's number one on your to-do list the second this webinar is over, that you contact your administrators and say, what do I do if I am afraid for my child, for a child's safety? It is really scary, and we are seeing skyrocketing cases of both domestic violence, addiction, and suicide ideology, and all of that is in play right now because we are trapped inside of our own heads in our own houses. So thank you for being aware of that, Donna. And without going in counseling, because that's not what SEL or mindfulness is. We are teachers, we're music teachers. That is our job, to teach music and help build these skills. But that being said, please make sure your district has things in place that if you are worried, you are able to tell someone else, and who should be able to have a larger impact than we will for that type of thing.
Thank you, Scott. So Neil Smith asks, this is for Matthew, how do you respond to students or parents who have concerns about mindfulness because they associate it with faith-based practices such as Buddhist meditation?
Sure, a fair question. Don't use the word mindfulness. Just teach breathing. I first started teaching breathing in my classes when I was the Loveland High band director, and I introduced it a few years into teaching, and I simply said, let's breathe through our nose, in for 4, out for 4. In fact, let's try this together, everybody on the call. In our nose for 4, out our nose for 4. Just feel how this calms everything down. Here we go. In, out. One more. Out. You see how still the room feels? Like you already feel much more focused. The first time I did this, my students like just listened to the room and they were almost in awe of the silence. And then they said, can we do that every day? And I said, sure. And it turned out that the kids loved it because they were really stressed out from running from one class to the next. And they had been used to what we call in band the breathing gym, which is, high powered breathing to expand lung capacity. So introducing a different type of breathing wasn't totally a foreign thing, but it had a different purpose. So we ended up calling the breath the focus breath. And then instead of asking students to stop talking, I had a nonverbal, I still use this in rehearsals. Well, not today, but 2 months ago I did, where I'd say, breathe through your nose. And now I never ask students to stop talking because you can't talk when you're breathing through your nose. It actually became a classroom management strategy, but also refocused the students and it ignited the prefrontal cortex and neocortex, which is what we want to have our students be doing. So using breathing strategies is really, really great. You don't have to call it mindfulness. I've used gratitude breaths with my honor bands and university ensembles where I'll say, breathe in something you're grateful for, like think about it, in for 4 counts, and then exhale 8 counts of anything that's toxic or negative or stress in your life. Let's try this as a call right now, everybody. In for 4, think about something you appreciate. Exhale all the toxicity you want to get out. In for 4, out for 8. Here we go. In, out. I never have to use the word mindfulness, okay? Mindfulness is simply a label to describe being aware of your surroundings. That's good teaching. Directed listening for intonation. How can we blend that trumpet sound and that clarinet tone to just get a little bit more of a shimmer? All of a sudden, students are heightened in the present moment, which you could say is mindfulness, but you don't have to call it that. So if it's an issue, just avoid using the word, but know that using breathing to affect your focus, to calm your emotions down. This is taught by wellness doctors, totally non-religion related. There are mindful teachers that strictly teach no relation to spirituality. One is Sam Harris, the author of Waking Up. It's particularly written to not have anything to do with religion. So if that's an important thing, that's a reference for all of you.
Great, thank you. There's an anonymous attendee who asks, do you have any suggestions for dealing with feeling marginalized? I'm used to having the power in my classroom to make connections. Now, for so many reasons, that power has been taken away. Maybe that's for you, Scott, or Bobby?
I'm actually gonna, Bobby, if you have something there, I think hearing from a teacher here in the trenches would be a good first step.
Yeah.
I do have thoughts.
I mean, the mute all button is pretty awesome. I wish I could take that when we get back to normal classes. But no, that's a good, serious question. And I think to answer it broadly, maybe identifying the parts of teaching that you feel marginalized with. Like, I wanted to do a virtual choir and I'm not a good video editor. And so we didn't do that. But I've done some audio stuff. So we did that. If you're uncomfortable with technology, figuring out what method you like. We did, we recorded some short video lessons. That was actually way more frustrating than Zoom for me, but some people like that. So I would say try and narrow it down what you're getting frustrated with, and then try something new, is what I would do. What I find the most life from is the Zoom classes, actually. It puts me in a better mood. And so that gives me a way to recharge. Following up with emails and phone calls about grades doesn't give me life. And so, trying to spend your time on the things that you like has been helpful to me as we go through this.
In terms of being marginalized, I would also ask you to do a little bit of reflection, as Bobby just suggested, about why. And oftentimes this is, and I'm not projecting anything on you, but I know for myself, when I feel marginalized, it's because I had some false sense of power or false sense of control, and it was my classroom and we were teaching. And now we don't have that. So what is filling my cup right now is seeing students respond to each other and collaborate with each other. And there's some great opportunities that are happening through technology, through online composition software, through different things that we're doing. And I totally get Zoom fatigue, folks, but there are great ways that we can connect students. And I'm just going to suggest that it's not necessarily a bad thing if we have less of a role in our classroom. It's not necessarily a bad thing.
Speaking of Zoom fatigue, Lee Pearson says, most teachers I've talked with feel exhausted by online teaching. My theories become disembodied by this two-dimensional media. What strategies do you have for being more embodied and present, I think, when teaching and learning? Maybe that one for you, Matthew? Who just, there you are.
Sure, yeah, I'd love to tackle that one. First of all, I know gallery view is great because students, but as often as you can actually, if you are using Zoom or if you can be speaker view, it's actually much better for our brain. And as human beings, we're not designed to take in all the facial expressions simultaneously, and we do this subconsciously. And so staring at gallery view, some of you might be looking at us in gallery view right now, you might want to switch to speaker view, because as human beings, we're really designed to take in one at a time. You think about mirror neurons, but looking at a gallery view, it's like brain overload. So that might be why after a 60-minute Zoom class, you feel completely depleted. And I certainly have. And the thing that I need to do is I always schedule my classes with a 5-minute break. I don't know if you have that possible. And I will go outside and literally touch the soil and touch the grass to get reconnected. Or use a mindful breathing strategy, meditate for three minutes, get grounded, leave the computer. Our eyes need to be looking at things with different depths. If we're always looking at that, as you mentioned, that two-dimensional screen, it's really bad for our brain, right? I get that, but that's the world we live in. So we need to find ways to recharge. And for me, it's leaving the screen, stepping outside and, getting some sunshine if there is sun, touching the soil and getting grounded again, because there's a lot going on with our computer and we actually just need to get back in touch with nature. So nature and breathing and just stepping away. Also, movement is really important. We're sitting all the time. And there's so much research on the dangers of sitting in terms of the effect. We're meant to move as human beings. So get some movement, do some 10 jumping jacks. In fact, have your classes do some movement when they're on the screen, because the students are in the same way and their brains just go turning off and off and off. All of a sudden, okay, let's take a break. Everybody up, let's move around. Woo! Okay, cool, back to the screen. Okay, and so you can introduce things like that. Hopefully some of the strategies help out.
Thank you. This one's a question for Scott from Katie Stanowski. You mentioned the importance of helping our kids continue to fall in love with music. As an instrumental music teacher, I recognize that many of my students enroll in classes partly because of their love for music, but also because they value the social and emotional connection they get from being in this activity with their close friends. What are your thoughts on continuing to motivate their love for this activity in spite of being limited, and how they can connect with their peers?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that we're still going to be navigating and discovering. And after I finish my thoughts, I do want to kind of toss this one to Bobby, because I think Bobby does this expertly in his class and has continued to do it over the summer. over this last little bit. The challenge that we have is how do we make connection, and without sounding like a broken record, to get them to fall in love with music. I think sometimes we get too narrow in terms of what music should be taught in music education. And, when Bobby was talking about make a playlist of your favorite music, that's a way just to remind us that music is valuable in our lives, that music is essential in our lives. Music is foundational. It is a non-negotiable in our lives. We need to keep on reminding our students that just because, that's the entry point, just because band, choir, orchestra isn't going to look like what we're used to, what we're used to it looking like, doesn't mean that we still can't meet their needs. There's a good friend of mine who we're going to be doing some webinars coming up, Bob Morrison out of New Jersey, who is one of the leading advocates for music education in our country. And his thing is, we're going to have to change the how, or we're going to lose the what. Okay. We can't dig our heels and say, we have to take what we've been doing remotely and try to replicate it online, because that's not going to work. We'll do that at a C+ level, even if we're masters at technology. We're going to have to change the how. And the how really does start. Now I'm going to dig into the weeds of SEL just a little bit. The how is when we start to get our students to reflect upon how the music they're missing is affecting them. That's the self-awareness. Can they say, this is what music means to me? It's really easy for me to put a mission statement out there and say, this is the mission statement of XYZ middle school. Okay, that's great. But did they have a say in it? Did they have a buy-in? Absolutely. We start by getting our students to reflect about what is the value of music in their life. And then to articulate that, how do you feel the collaboration element feeds into that. So what we're starting to do is to get your students to articulate into words the value of music, exactly what you're saying. Now you say, Scott, I teach kindergarten. What does that look like? They can't write in a way that's going to be very thorough. Okay, have them doodle, have them draw, have them find things around the house that they can do a musical improvisation about what music means to them. Oh my goodness, one, it's going to melt your heart. Two, the parents are going to say, what is this racket, which we all love. And three, it's going to provide you an opportunity to remind your students why they love music. So we are going to be able to do this. We are going to be able to do this. It's not going to look the same. It can't look the same. So this is where our good teaching comes in. Bobby, I'm going to throw it to you now, because I know you do some really great things with your students.
Yeah, well, this has been a really hard question. And I think we pretty quickly realized that we aren't the experts on what kids want, they are. And so when we asked, like, hey, what do you want out of this choir experience for the rest of the year? We got a lot of different answers, and different than I would have thought necessarily. So a lot of kids, like, you asked specifically, like, how can they continue to love the activity of instrumental music? For us in choir, a lot of kids were like, hey, can you give me some techniques on how to work on my own voice in my room? And so we went through, different stretching and breathing and vocal warm-ups and concepts. And other kids, really miss being with other people. And so we tried to give them ideas of a specific group of kids that are also engaged to talk with, and maybe some ideas to stay connected online. But the big thing we found is asking the kids what they wanted out of the class and what they love, and then they're more invested in our answer too.
Great, thank you. So had a couple of questions on the topic of student or pre-service teachers, and what advice you have about having them learn about SEL and mindfulness, how they can help maybe incorporate some of this, anything that they should be doing in working with the pre-service teachers in this particular environment.
Okay, well, I'll jump in, because I was actually just teaching my seniors instrumental methods and rehearsal techniques course just about 3 hours ago. And so the thing is, our students that are at the college level right now can really relate to this at a level that is pretty incredible because they're going through it simultaneously. So they're feeling in many ways what the younger students are today feeling. They're feeling similar at the college. They're going stir crazy being at home constantly, particularly if you think of a college student who thought that they were leaving home. If they were on a residential campus, they thought they were getting away from home, and then all of a sudden sent back to home. So that's been a really challenging thing for them. But we talk a lot about how do you feel, and we use things on Zoom like whiteboard and chat a lot to, like, how are you feeling about things? Using polling with your students is really important, but actually using mindful strategies in your teaching with your students. So if you are a college teacher, introducing these breathing techniques. The idea is that we can shift our emotions. And if you're feeling really anxious or frustrated or irritated, you don't have to live in that place forever. You can actually take control of yourself by shifting your breathing. So when you are really stressed out, this is just a real quick lesson on breathing. When you're stressed out, our breathing changes. It's a physiological change. We can't help it. So if you're angry, or frustrated or anxious, your breathing gets tight, fast, shallow, loud, and irregular. And you can feel that. And when we're calm, our breathing slows down. It's deep, slow, and quiet. So you can't just say, I'm going to shift my emotions. Imagine, like, stop being angry. It doesn't work that way. But you can slowly shift your breathing, and then that's a pathway to changing your emotions. Similarly, teaching students and experiencing this in class, let's focus on what we're grateful for. I've used whiteboard in Zoom, and the first question of the class is, what brings you joy, comfort, or you're grateful for? Fill up that whiteboard. And everybody writing things down, maybe their pet, maybe their little brother, maybe the sunshine, whatever it is, it's filling up with all these positive comments. It really brings a smile to the face of the college students. So they're experiencing it. And then we're talking about how do you bring that into the public schools? And really, you do it the same way. They're experiencing it, and they're going to be able to use that in their student teaching and in their first years of teaching. So
spot on, Matthew. I couldn't agree more. At the heart of this, especially with what we're doing now, it's all about modeling. I mean, we have a 3.5-year-old, and we are acutely aware of how our energy affects him. And our good days, hey, he naps well, and are his good days. Our bad days, right? Okay. So important that we are modeling mindfulness in social and emotional learning. And are we embedding these activities into our curriculum? Let's just face it. I saw a question pop up on student teaching. The realities of fieldwork are going to change in the fall. It's not going to be as easy as it's been. Well, nothing's easy, but it's going to be different. This past year, there was a great question on why this panel that popped up that I addressed in the chat box, but Bobby and I have worked together this entire year implementing an SEL curriculum in his choral classroom. That would not be a reality next year. Schools are saying no visitors. Schools are saying no fieldwork. So the answer is, if we're going to model this, it has to be embedded in our curriculum so that our future teachers see it in practice. Will it be as beneficial as being in the sandbox with the K-12 students? No. But if we're modeling it and we're living it and we're prioritizing it, it's going to set us up for success. The other thing is, and I started off today saying this, you're going to hear SEL more in the next 2 weeks than you ever have. I am getting daily requests from districts saying, how do we implement social and emotional learning? What does this look like? How can we justify our place at the table through social and emotional learning? And the answer is, if we're going to do that and you want that answer, you got to do it. So thinking about how we embed, how we model, you're setting your students up for success, prioritizing and rallying around this cause.
Thank you. We have a question from Patrice Metcalf, who is a director of an adult choir at her church, and wanted to know if you need to do anything different on social emotional learning topics when working with adults versus kids.
I'll tackle it, and then Bobby, if you have any thoughts, because I think the first thing that pops into my head is I try not to, and granted the entry points are different, but I try not to treat students as kids. I try to treat them as little adults early on. and have that type of expectation for them. And if you reach them at that level, then they will respond at that level. I believe that there are no topics, and I know this is counter to your question, but there are no topics that are too big to bring up to our little ones. We just have to Mr. Rogers it down to a level that's digestible and that's appropriate. So the answer really isn't, are there different strategies? Because SEL strategies are fairly universal. The answer is, what is the noun and what is the entry point, and how do our students, our colleagues, our friends need to navigate their own social and emotional awareness? The biggest thing is, you know, a lot of our SEL work caps out at 12th grade. We don't have a lot of resources for higher ed. We don't have a lot of resources for adult ed, but we all know many adults who need SEL. Totally get it. So continuing to address using some of the similar strategies that we've talked about in other webinars, and there's resources out there, but thinking about, you know, what is the value of your group? What is the culture of your group? And how are you going to provide an entry point that's relevant for those people? And that's the biggest difference, that we're meeting them and not trying to say, I need to make you more self-aware, but saying, you know what? Here's what we're doing today. Here's our central message. How is this relevant in your life? What are your skills? What are your needs? How are we going to build on that? How are we working through with community? How are we blending together so that we're a cohesive unit as opposed to individuals? All those questions are relevant for kindergartners and are relevant for adults. So those are things that it's just, what is the entry point? Bobby, you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, just one. I would say that adults might have a little more ego and pride than a fourth grader, maybe. And so I directed a church choir for a couple of years. And even if I used a very similar lesson plan for high schoolers and adults, I would usually try and be more vulnerable with the adults and say, like, man, I was teaching this lesson on self-awareness today, and I found myself getting angry. And like, I can't believe that, you know, so modeling kind of the type of responses we want from an adult church choir, and just being open that we are feeling the same things too, that it's not a childish lesson. It's important for everybody.
Great, thank you. Jim Van Sant wanted to know strategies for working with administration and decision makers about embedding and convincing them about the need to embed SEL into the curriculum. And that, of course, how we can protect music curriculum and keep expectations strong for music teaching in the fall.
Yeah, Matt, you want to take it?
Sure, yeah, and then we can pass it around. First of all, hello, Jim. It's great to see you on this call. And what I've been sharing is that music education can be the leader in this field. SEL is now popping into the radar of every administrator, but I believe that we can do this better than any field. I believe that music education is poised to be the leader in change in education in America, in the United States. Because if we focus on SEL, that's what we can do through music. And many of us were doing it pre-COVID, but if we didn't do it a whole lot, we're certainly aware of its importance now, the emotional well-being of our students. And tapping into music's ability to express from the heart and to connect with what truly makes us human is what music allows us to do. And that's what our students need more than anything right now. They've been separated, physically distanced, and music is beautiful and magical because it's the thing that allows us to connect with others on the other side of the world. We can be sharing music together and feeling those feelings without even speaking a common language. And so showing that we're already using SEL right now is something that should be celebrated. So I'm a huge advocate for teachers to always be sharing the positives of what's going on in your classroom regularly. Even if you're not getting a response from your administrator, dropping a note in the email, sending a text saying, I'm so excited about class today. We spent the first 15 minutes talking about music and its emotional impact on a student and why? And why do they feel that way? I think there's something here that could be used for all the classes at our school. If you'd like to learn more, I think that I'd be happy to give a seminar to teachers of other subject areas. All of a sudden, you're offering something that the administrator is racking their brain with anyways. They're thinking, oh my gosh, how are we possibly going to counsel the number of students that are going through trauma when they return to school? I need help. We don't have the funding to hire additional counselors or school nurses, but we have music teachers. And I think that if we can offer our services and come from a service side of things, it's the best way to advocate for our program. So I'll just throw that out there. Scott, you want to take it?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, the music classroom, the fine arts classrooms are the perfect place for SEL. We know this. Music is emotional, music is social. We've always rallied around two things in our culture. We've rallied around music and we've rallied around food. Those are the two things, the non-negotiables. So when we start to think from that perspective, students naturally want to come to us. And there's a couple of big points that I want to make as we're advocating. And I just want to reiterate, there's going to be a whole webinar that we're going to talk about how to make a compelling argument. And that's on June 4th at 4 p.m., sponsored through NAFME. But for right now, I'm just going to put it at this, that the more that we dig our heels in, the less effective we're going to be. So we need to necessarily bring down performance and bring up respond, connect, and create the other three elements of music education that we know are so important. We do that, then this provides the fertile ground for fostering voice and choice. This is the type of argument that I'm going to be making to an administrator. I'm going to talk to, I doubt that very many administrators are not going to have SEL on the brain. They may not be calling that, but the number one thing that on every single administrator's mind right now is safety, physical, emotional, social safety. That's it. So when Matthew says, I'm going to bring this out and I'm going to say, you know what, there's this thing called SEL, I'm proactive, here I am. That's great. I'm all in for that. That's going to really, really help. The thing that we need to make sure that we're doing is that we're making SEL explicit and that we are making it embedded into our instruction. When we do that, then we're going to be able to make a compelling argument about why us and not just why SEL. So a couple of the big ticket items that we're going to be talking about a lot to say why SEL. The first one is resiliency. Our musicians are resilient. Otherwise, we'd never put on a single concert. Okay, resiliency is a huge SEL skill. Diversity. We have an opportunity to look at musics across so many different elements. When we do that, we are fostering diversity. And if we're not, we have the opportunity to do so. High standards. The standards aren't going to be the same. The standards aren't going to be the same, and we're not measuring the same thing, but we are going to be in a position where we are going to be able to still hold our students to a high standards. And it's a cultural necessity, along with food. So those things are going to be our big ticket selling points. I doubt that in the next few weeks, because of what we're hearing at a policy level, at federal and state policy level, that administrators aren't going to be aware of SEL. So I don't think you're going to need to do a ton of educating about this is SEL. I think your point is, here's music, here's why it's conducive, here's what I'm doing. I don't care if I can't have a concert because I can still make my kids love music, and here's how SEL is going to help.
Thank you. This next question is for Bobby. Ann Kelly wants to know, she's a middle school teacher. She's nervous about making connections to the incoming sixth graders, potentially online next year, who she won't have met face-to-face ever before. What strategies do you have to make connections with new students completely virtually?
Yeah, I would first of all contact their fifth grade teachers who have met them in person, and they might be able to give you some insights. We do this with freshmen. We talk to our eighth grade teachers and kind of say, hey, tell me about the kids that are coming here. What do I need to know? Who do I need to watch out for? So that might help because they've had actual physical interaction, because how kids are behaving online is so different than how they are in class. And I have to remember that because I've been getting really frustrated with some kids that are great in person, but they might have some real technology issues, either access or ability. And so, getting that person, like a personal recommendation almost might help. But then I would say it's the same for building relationships with any students, finding ways for them to share about themselves, finding things that you can connect with them about. I've been playing a lot of Animal Crossing, and the kids love that. And so we can talk about Animal Crossing, just finding ways to connect with them, and learning about them, and then using that, just like we do. I've found, like I said, I've found the Zoom meetings helpful, but maybe it's like Matthew was saying, it's polls or surveys that you get a sense for who likes what, and find some interest there.
Great, thank you. This next one for Scott. I teach at a Title I school and have a number of students who've completely fallen off the map over the last few months. Do you have any creative ideas to try to reestablish contact with students who've disappeared?
So, Bobby, I'm going to tag you in on this. The answer, I have a couple thoughts, but then Bobby's the one who's doing this actively right now. The big gist is a couple of things. One, we're not going to catch 100% of our students, and we need to, for our own mental health and our own headspace, give ourselves just a little bit of freedom to say, you know what, we're not going to catch 100%. And just because they're not engaging with you doesn't mean you're not reaching them, and doesn't mean you're not having an impact. If the students don't have their cameras on, we cannot take that as a personal affront. If the camera's not on, it might be because their parents are saying the house is a mess and I don't want you to see it. It could be that simple, but it's not the kid's choice whether to engage. So, we're not in an environment right now. We're not in an environment right now where education makes sense. We shouldn't be teaching and learning from home. There's a reason that schools happen on neutral territory, because that's the space for learning. That's a space that we come and we have a purpose, and space is important. When I'm at home and you're at home, we have totally different identities when we're at home than when we're at school. So we need to give ourselves just a little bit of space there to navigate. Now, the Title I piece, I totally get that this brings up so many different issues of resource, of how we're navigating, what students are able to bring to the table. And in terms of technology, at the very least, I read a heartbreaking thing on the Facebook today about a kid who was taking an AP test in the parking lot of McDonald's, because that's the best place they could get reliable internet. Heartbreaking. But this is one thing the pandemic is showing, is it is showing cracks, and the cracks that we're having are becoming more and more evident. And I am hoping that if we emerge on this with the same mindset that many of us have realized that we had a missed opportunity, that we need to come out of this with a bigger awareness of inequality, a bigger awareness of what that looks like, and to do what we can in education to help fix some of that. Bobby.
Yeah, our school is Title I also, and we're seeing the same disengagement issues. I would agree with Scott that we are trying, but we cannot get to every kid. I would say just keep on putting out positive lessons that they can maybe access in different ways. So I know that more of my kids have phones than have like a computer they can use. And so if I can send out a YouTube link, that's better than, sharing a file. If they don't have any kind of internet access, hopefully the school can help you find that out. Usually the school has data on that. And maybe it's a phone call to them. Maybe you can print out a packet and bring them to that, to the students. I know another music teacher, Matt Weber, is in here somewhere. He printed out packets and brought them to his students' houses as a way to get around it. And different schools in our district have had they'll find ways to pass out materials too, along with like meal distribution. So that's maybe another way, but just trying to find new ways to make your content available in different formats that the kids can access them.
Great, thank you. And the next question to Matthew. Are there any ideas or thoughts you have about working with kids who have different learning styles during this distracting new experience affecting this as what is now hypersensitive for many? How do you work with different kids and their different ways of learning?
Well, always a really important question, right? Whether we're separated or together, to always be aware of, how students learn with diverse learners, and being really sensitive and cognizant. And I think one of the best ways is to have a variety of strategies, right? And so even in online learning, to engage students in multiple different ways to find something that works for the student. I'll go back to something Scott said earlier, which was a voice and choice. So providing choice for students so they can find something that really resonates with them. My students at Lawrence are collaborating with students in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, where their students are working with mine, and my students design projects for them to do. And some of the most successful ones were where my students would create a project where the student could choose one of 3 assignments, one that they really liked. It could be like a found sound project where you record sounds in your house and put it together. Another one was make a playlist for a family member or friend, interview them and find out what songs they like. And then there'd be a third one, maybe it was like a DJ thing where they could mix sounds on GarageBand, put it together. You find something that resonates with the student, or give an open-ended thing, say like, hey, the purpose of this lesson is this particular goal. If you can find another creative way to do it, totally awesome. So it is leading to much more creativity from the students to empower them to discover how they learn best. And it's actually one of the silver linings I think that's happened in these last 2 months, is empowering students to make choices. And we were meeting many of the national standards in new ways, particularly the creativity, the reflection, allowing students to reflect on music that they like, and having them make choices is a wonderful thing that's happened, particularly for directors like me, who we've been very focused on the concert. Well, there is no concert. So now it's getting back to our why music? Why are we passionate about music, and helping students find their voice? And I'll be curious to see in the long run if we have people stay with music much longer. Will we retain students beyond middle school, beyond high school? Are they going to re-fall in love with music so that we have lifelong pursuers of performing, playing, creating music out of this? So of course, mindfulness strategies, things like deep breathing and stuff, I think do work for every student. I haven't heard of, everybody breathes. So I would share that is an all-encompassing strategy. Thanks, Alec.
Scott or Bobby? Scott, do you have anything you want to add?
I'm good.
Okay. So we're rounding up on an hour. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll talk about some other items at the very end. So last question from Jim Van Sant again. What strategies would you suggest with new and first-time choir students or other instrumentalists for helping them to be vulnerable enough to sing or perform? Many students feel more confident with their friends around, but that's all stripped away in a Zoom environment or social distance environment.
Yeah, so the being isolated is a major problem, I agree. And because of that, a lot of kids haven't wanted to send in audio of just them. That was probably their number one fear of doing like a virtual choir. Something that I think is helpful is we've made resources with just us singing a part, and you can sing along with it. I've made like files of myself and a student teacher I had singing all the parts of a song, and so they can sing along with it, or just a YouTube video. Finding ways to give them like the sonic support, even though they don't have their friend next to them, that's going to help. That's not like, I don't know, that unique, but it's a little something that they hear more than just themselves.
Great.
And, I kind of want to contextualize that just a little bit, that music education privileges extroverts. If you are an extrovert, you thrive in music education because you like to put yourself out there. That being said, and I'm not saying that this is a totally different environment, but there are many introverted people who are thriving in this environment, and we are finding a place for having a voice online. When I teach online courses, oftentimes I get a more thoughtful response from some than I would in person. So I bring this up not to say, not to devalue the question or not to devalue solutions, but saying that every single student approaches this level of engagement differently. And I think one of the first things we need to do, especially as we enter a new year, if we are remote in the fall, is ask students how they feel about contributing in this manner. Again, voice. If we're questioning this, ask them. That is the best thing that we can do to provide this. Alec, before, I was just kind of scanning the questions, and there were a lot of questions about SEL sequencing and beginning social and emotional learning programs and what that looks like. I'm going to type my email into the chat, but the short answer is we kind of conceptualize this as more of a dialogue and kind of guided as questions. There are much more stand and delivery webinars out there on this is SEL, this is how you make it musical, and a lot of them are on live on the NAFME website. And if you email me, I'd be happy to send you links, and I'd be happy to also just dialogue with you in your own context if you're interested on starting an SEL curriculum and what that would look like.
Thank you. And I was also going to say that I'm going to post on the GIA Music Education Facebook page additional resources and links. So maybe, Scott, you can send them to me as well. I'll put them on the GIA Music at Facebook page, so folks can go there and see some of these amazing resources that are out there and available to everybody on the webinar. So again, thanks to these amazing panelists. Really appreciate it. Really important information. Is there anything else anyone wants to mention? I know we've got a couple of courses at Vandercook College this summer, one on social emotional learning and music education that Scott's going to be giving, and then Matthew's going to be doing one on mindfulness at Vandercook. These are online courses. Anything else anyone wants to mention? We have the webinar too on June 4th that on the NAFME website on advocacy. You can go to that website to learn more about that. Anything else anyone wants to mention?
I'll go ahead and chime in for a quick second, Alec. Also encourage attendees to attend the Conn-Selmer Institute Connect. So CSI Connect is virtual and online. That's June 8 and June 9. And you can still register for that. And there will be many clinics on similar topics. Scott and myself will also be presenting there. So we're going to continue to talk about it. We'll continue to have webinars, so stay tuned for all of those and continue to write articles on this really, really important topic. Remember, it's not just great for us personally and for our students, which is really our students are the focal point and why we teach, right? We teach people first and use music as the tool to reach them, right? And lift others up. But also it is critical that we use this for advocacy. I really think that we can advocate in ways that maybe administrators never understood before. And my hope is that we can have music education thrive in this transformed world coming out of this. Are there going to be some bumps in the road? Yes. Are we going to have to be super adaptable and flexible? Yes. But that's why we studied music, to be creative. That's a 21st century skill. So now it's testing ourselves. To use the word that Bobby used earlier, this is about tapping into our own growth mindset. And maybe we're going to be doing things we've never done before. And that's okay, because we've always been asking our students to take risks and, try out that saxophone. Come on, try it, blow harder, And now that's us. We're beginners, and approach it with a beginner's mind. I like to think of approaching life with childlike curiosity and wonderment. And when you start doing that, you get a lot more excited about the life you're leading in the present moment.
The only closing thought Bobby, please go.
Oh, I was just going to say a huge thank you to all of the people that attended. Just because you're here shows that you care about this and you're inquisitive and keep asking questions. Like, this is a huge deal. And thank you for coming and asking questions. But just because you're here, you're a leader. So keep that up. Yeah, really awesome to see so many people here.
I kind of want to just say, surround yourself with good people. And, the privilege that I've had today is to share this with Bobby and Matthew, both good friends, and To be able to come around and realize that we're not islands is such an important thing. And to be able to share and to come together and to pick each other's brains. There is no such thing as being okay. I'm sorry. It's okay to say, I don't know. And when we say, I don't know, and we rely on friends to help us, that models vulnerability. One last point. Your kids are used to having standing ovations at this point of the year. They're used to putting on their end of the year concerts. They're used to having audience validate the hard work that they've put in. They don't have that. And depending on what your closure is, I know there are different avenues and different ways. I highly, highly encourage you to, one, find some way to find closure. And it doesn't need to be a virtual performance. It doesn't need to be anything close to that. It just has to be closure. And two, you need to be your students' biggest fans. You be their standing ovation because they deserve it. They've been through a lot of this, and you'll be surprised. Some of the students are going to give you a standing ovation too. We need to support each other through all of this. So just a final thank you to Alec and GIA.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your days. Thanks to this amazing panel. And we'll post it, as I said, as soon as we can on the GI Facebook page and YouTube channel. And thanks, everybody. Enjoy your day. Take care.